Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Dean Rafe here on the Forum on Economic Rights. And here today we're going to talk about, well, before I get into that, I am actually excited that I received the first bit of feedback on the channel. And that feedback was that the videos could be a little longer and that I should be sharing my ideas more fully. Um, I was trying to leave it open as a space for other people to share their ideas, but the feedback was to share my ideas, if for no other reason than to spur more conversation. So I am going to try that format today, and we'll see how that goes. Um, so today we're going to talk about the right to a decent home, which I have made the the Economic Bill of Rights, Article 4. I took that straight from FDR's second Bill of Rights, and he specifically said the right of every family to a decent home. So, a little vague, so we'll get into that a little bit. So, looking up on Wikipedia, actually, it gives the definition: the right of housing, occasionally the right to shelter, is the economic, social, and cultural right to adequate housing and shelter. It is recognized in some national constitutions and in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a document put forth by the United Nations and the General Assembly, and also the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, also by the United Nations. The right, this is back to Wikipedia, the right to housing is regarded as a freestanding right in the international human rights law. So Wikipedia then cites Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, again from the UN, recognizing the right to housing. And it states that everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood or in circumstances beyond his control. Then Wikipedia also goes on to point to another, they call it I'm going to mess up this name. It's the name of a city. I looked it up in Indonesia, I believe it is, the Yogyakarta Principles on the Application of International Human Rights Law in relation to sexual orientation and gender identity affirm. It's a mistype, I think, on Wikipedia, but trying to just quote it directly. And so in that, I'll read it briefly, some of that. Everyone has the right to adequate housing, including protection from eviction without discrimination, and that states shall take all necessary legislative, administrative, and other measures to ensure security to tenure and access to affordable, habitable, accessible, culturally appropriate, and safe housing, not including shelters and other emergency accommodation, without discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, sexual orientation, gender identity, or material or family status. Also take all necessary legislative, administrative, and other measures to prohibit the execution of evictions that are not in conformity with their international human rights obligations, and ensure that adequate and effective legal or other appropriate remedies are available to any person claiming that a right to protection against forced evictions has been violated or is under threat of violation, including the right to resettlement, which includes the right to alternative land of better or equal quality and to adequate housing without discrimination. So I appreciate that got more specific than some of the other broader language that they were using, but I just want to now step back and take a look at and decide what is a right. What do we mean when we say that there's a right? And That didn't get at all confusing when I looked up the definition of a right on the internet, and it gave 53 different definitions. So I took the top 5. A just claim or title, whether legal, prescriptive, or moral. Second definition, sometimes rights that which is due to anyone by just claim, legal guarantees, or moral principles, etc. Definition 3, adherence or obedience to moral and legal principles and authority. 4, that which is morally, legally, or ethically proper. And 5, a moral, ethical, or legal principle considered as an underlying cause of truth, justice, morality, or ethics. So those definitions, I think I lean more toward the first definition, a just claim or title, whether legal, prescriptive, or moral. And I think I try to go a little bit far away from moral. I feel like that's where their conversation is going there. Take that back. That was in reference to Wikipedia and the explanation of that standpoint that I don't fully agree with. So I guess that's why I use that pronoun there. I think sometimes people make rights a moral thing, whether that's coming from a religious moral or just like their own ethical standard of moral, like that it's immoral to evict somebody from a space. But I feel like I'm trying to take the moral part of it out of it, and that it's just we need a set of laws that govern our interactions. So when I'm talking about rights, I'm talking about the claim that somebody might have based off of the legal standpoint or legal precedents that we've created with our laws, with our legal system. So I guess I'm getting a little lost in the weeds right now. So as I'm going through, I'm thinking of a right as a just claim from a legal perspective that's prescribed by the laws that are created. And so that's where creating this Bill of Rights is trying to standardize or land on what those claims of our rights will be based off of this new economic legal system. So then I also wanted to kind of look at what is property, because they were talking about like eviction and the right to housing. Of course, that is this housing that you're going to own, or is this housing that the government's just going to be providing to you? So I think property is important. And do we have a legal right to property? So then AI gave me this wonderful AI generated definition of property rights. Property rights are a fundamental legal concept establishing a relationship between a person and a thing, an asset, granting exclusive rights to use, enjoy, possess, and transfer that asset, whether tangible like a car or land, or intangible like intellectual property. These rights, often called a bundle of sticks, vary by society and law, providing a framework for economic activity and personal security by defining who controls a resource and how it can be used and transferred. So right there, I think that's a pretty good definition, because it's bringing up in a property owner's expectations of property ownership, and then like a renter's rights as a renter. So now moving back on the Yogyakarta principles, most of that's just discussing like discrimination. So I think like we're here to just discuss the right to housing, and not necessarily the right somebody has to no discrimination. So I think we'll just agree right now that we all agree that people should not be discriminated against. and that we accept that as a separate argument for this moment. But regarding evictions, property owners have to have the right to eviction. Otherwise, it's not their property. Otherwise, their property rights are being infringed upon. So I don't look at evictions as like a immoral act or something that is not allowed. I think that any this also comes from me having had my real estate license, having in California, and helping to execute leases on both sides. Whether I've been the lessor or helped the lessor or me being the leasee, you have to understand your contract and like whatever's in there, that's the contract you agreed with. So I don't understand why people pretend like evictions are these like immoral things where it's like so unokay for people to be evicted. Also, I've seen living in New York off and on, I've seen this huge thing, this conversation around property and neighborhoods becoming gentrified, and that there's communities that get angry when myself, as a white man, have moved into the neighborhood because I'm making their property values go up. I was literally chased down the street in a neighborhood in Brooklyn, and somebody was screaming, "Pirates, pirates, they be stealing our houses." And he was following me for several blocks and was very uncomfortable. But that just shows me, and that's like surrounding like the dialogue that people have while I was living there, just that they look at it as their right to be there, but they don't own the property. They're renting it, and they still think that it's theirs, that their landlord can't sell it for a profit and have them be evicted or lose their position there because the building's going to be torn down or whatever. But it's like, so I guess that's my big question. Does a renter have rights beyond those that are extended in their contract, in their rental contract? Like, do they have a reasonable expectation to be able to stay there for 50 years, even though the rental contract says nothing of that sort? Usually the rental contract is going year for year. Maybe their families lived there for 25 years. Does 25 years suddenly mean that now they have a greater right to the space? I don't believe it does, but that's what I don't know. That was the sentiment that people had. So I believe that evictions are legal and should be allowed in all instances, barring any conversation on discrimination, which should be dealt with separately, I believe, as a legal argument or a legal statute of its own. So Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, going back to that, everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family, including food, clothing, housing, medical care, and necessary social services. So I'm going to edit out the food, the clothing, the medical, and other necessary social services. And I'm just going to reread that. Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family regarding housing. So what does that even mean? Because that's incredibly vague. Great, everybody has this standard of living, right? So does that mean everybody gets a free house? You get a house, you get a house, you get a house? Are we all playing Oprah now? Like, the government doesn't have the resources to do that. And not just that, the government has to always confiscate what it has from others before it has something to give out. So does that mean we're going to always be taking houses from other people to be handing them out to the poor, as they might say? But so it like really takes me back to like what even is, going back to the idea of what is a right. And if everybody has the right to free healthcare, how does the government give that other than taking it away from everybody? taking it away from some to give it to others. And so then when I think back on the right to freedom of speech, when the government guarantees or our Constitution guarantees us the right to freedom of speech, it doesn't necessitate that they remove the right of freedom of speech from somebody else in order for them to give that to us. It's applied equally. Everybody gets the same freedom of speech. It doesn't mean they need to take it away from somebody else to grant it. And I would say the same thing about a trial by jury, our right to a trial by jury, a jury of our peers. It doesn't require that they take it away from somebody else in order to give it to me. But like if they're going to guarantee me the right to adequate food, first off, what does adequate food even mean? Because maybe I want to eat, what if adequate to me means that I get all the corn in the planet? Anything less than that is not adequate. So it's like you have to be able to establish what adequate means, but that right to food means that they would be having to take it away from somebody else to give it to me if I demanded it. That's why I don't think you can make a right something that has to be taken away from somebody else to grant it. The right to vote, same thing. You don't have to take away somebody else's right to vote in order to give me mine. Though I could see an argument that every vote is diminishing the vote of another, but that's not true because ultimately everybody gets one vote. Anyways, so I'm just looking through my notes, been jumping around. I would argue that I'm going to read my notes directly. Promising healthcare and housing and food means that they took it from someplace else in the economy to redistribute it. Do we have the right to the confiscation of someone else's goods or services? Do we have the right of confiscation? Do I have the right to say, I have the right to a house, therefore somebody should give it to me? So do I have the right to the confiscation of someone else's goods or services? Elon Musk, you owe me a house. Like, no, he doesn't have, that's called slavery, right? We abolished that in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights. He doesn't have to serve me or provide me with housing or living or anything. And that's interesting because even from him, I've heard him comment that maybe universal basic income might be necessary in the future. I'm not sure I agree with that. So no, I would argue that our rights are to be able to go to work and seek work so that we can provide housing for ourselves. I don't think, because that's something that the government can guarantee us the right to work without, it doesn't mean it's taking away from somebody else. We also have the right to property ownership. I think that right there is our most important right economically, the right to own something. If they create a system where they manipulate, so we have the right to property ownership, but if they are creating a system where they're manipulating the cost of money so that rich people keep getting richer and the poor people keep getting poorer, so like the rich, they keep getting cheap money because they've manipulated the cost of it and they get really low interest rates. Meanwhile, all the people with lesser value monetarily have to pay higher and higher interest rates. I would actually consider that an infringement on our property right ownership, our property ownership rights, more than, I would consider that an assault on our right when they're manipulating the markets, more so than that, like, because if they just make Elon Musk go and buy me a house, then that's an infringement on his rights. So I don't know, just a little food for thought. I feel like this was a very meandering post that's even with me trying to write notes to keep myself on track. Not sure I'm in love with this format, but hey, can only get better, hopefully. Thanks for tuning in, and please like and comment and do all the things. Yeah, I would love to hear people's thoughts on what are our rights and what are not. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll talk to you later.